familiar face around here. On her presentation, the Martyr the Traitor, so very appropriate for all the 250th festivities that are now ratcheting up for our nation's birthday. I want to thank Tompkins Community Bank and Matega Rotary Club for helping to sponsor the guest speaker series this year, as well as GoArt because we received a grant through their regrant program. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge GoArt's support of this project. GoArt recognizes that this gathering takes place on the ancestral lands of the Seneca Nation, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and acknowledges their enduring presence in this region. With that, Joyce, take it away.
Okay, thank you. This one is a little different than most of my programs. It's kind of American Revolution, but then it crosses over to genealogy, so it's kind of a crossover. And also has a connection with Wyoming County, which I thought was kind of neat. So there's a lot there for everybody. I brought some of the books, as I was telling them. The internet's great, the books are so much better. And you can't do sticky notes on the computer. So that way, these are 3 books that I'll talk about. The main one, as you notice, I named it after that. That was the main book that I used. This Connecticut-born young man, every school student knows. How many of you have heard of Nathan Hale? Yeah, everybody's heard of Nathan Hale, right? He's been quoted in every history book, revered as a true patriot, who died to gain independence for the colony. So everybody knows about him, although I'm going to tell you a little more about him. But there was another Connecticut-born young man who also gave his life for what he believed in. And do my research to find out more about my American Revolutionary ancestors. I have a ton of patriot ones because my Wheeler ancestors helped found the town of Concord. So they were right there. Concord, Lexington, tons of patriots. I've got 13, 18 different uncles and great-grandfathers that all fought in the Revolution. But among the patriots in my tree, I found that this second young man was my 5th great-grandfather. His name was Moses Dunbar. And he was a loyalist. So I thought, okay, some people ask me, well, how do you like that? You know, he wasn't a patriot. Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, you know, it's kind of like the Civil War. I always call the American Revolution the first Civil War because all the Americans were split up too. A lot of them were brother against brother. Son and father took different sides. And so the Revolution kind of was a Civil War also. This is their story. Nathan Hale and Moses Dunbar were both honorable men who followed their consciences to reach opposite conclusions about the merits of American independence. I'm going to do a little biography of Nathan Hale. He was born in Coventry, Connecticut in 1755 to Deacon Richard Hale and Elizabeth Strong, who was a descendant of Elder John Strong. He was a great-grandson of Reverend John Hale, an important figure in the Salem witch trials. So he came from great ancestors, descendants that had been in the country for many, many years. In 1769, when Nathan Hale was 14 years old, he was sent with his brother Enoch, who was 16, to Yale College. Can you imagine? Back then, you didn't have to be a certain age. Mainly, if you could read, write, and really were interested, you could move right along because it was one-room schoolhouses. And a lot of them never went past the 8th grade. And so at 14, he goes to Yale College. Nathan graduated with first-class honors in 1773 at the age of 18 and became a teacher. First in East Haddam and later in New London. I always interested in that because I was a teacher. And of course, I had to have 5 years of college, and then I went back and got my elementary degree and all that. But back then, if you could read and write and said, I want to be a teacher, many of them were 14 years old, and then they were teaching at the one-room schoolhouses. So you didn't have to have all of these degrees that you have to have today. Few Americans who recognize the name of Nathan Hale know that he was only 21 years old, okay, when he died. Only 21. He lived the vast majority of his brief life as a British subject. Okay, we were still a colony, not an American patriot. As a Yale College student, he strove to acquire the cultural knowledge and polite manners of an English gentleman. Okay. His untimely death came about not as a result of battlefield glory. a valor. Yes, he was in a few battles, but that's not why he was known, remembered. It's because he was a failed spy. Okay, that's how he got captured, not as a soldier, but as a spy by the British. In 1775, after the Revolutionary War began, Hale joined the Connecticut militia unit and was elected first lieutenant within 5 months. His company participated in the siege of Boston, but Hale remained behind, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's been suggested that he was unsure as to whether he really wanted to fight. Okay? Or it's possible that he was hindered because his teaching contract was still in effect, and it didn't expire until July of 1775, so maybe he couldn't go up to battle because he was still supposed to be teaching according to the contract. In 1776, he was part of Knowlton's Rangers, the first organized intelligence service organized in the United States of America. It was led by Colonel Thomas Knowlton. In the spring of 1776, the Continental Army moved to Manhattan to defend New York City against the anticipated British attack. Many people don't realize, I did have a program on that too, but Washington organized his own spy ring because he knew a lot of the British had spies, and he thought, well, if we're gonna win, we gotta have spies too. And so most of them were based in New York City, and that's where he had his spies and his intelligence. In August, the British soundly defeated the Continentals in the Battle of Long Island by a flanking move from Staten Island across Brooklyn. General George Washington was desperate to determine the location of the imminent British invasion of Manhattan. To that end, Washington called for a spy behind enemy lines. And Hale was the only one that volunteered. So that's how he ended up. He wanted to volunteer to do this, and evidently most of them didn't want to do that because it was dangerous, but Hale volunteered. He volunteered on September 8, 1776, to go behind enemy lines and troop movement, which he knew was an act of spying, and he knew that was punishable by death because that was treason, because the present government was British. So if you go against that, you could be hung as a spy, and you were accused of treason. There's many different stories about exactly what happened to him and who he talked to and all sorts of things, how he was captured. There's 3 different versions. And the thing is, do we really know which version is correct? Not necessarily, because there was no CNN or Fox News to tell us all about it. So Hale is not remembered for his success as a spy. He spent just over a week pretending to be a school teacher, of course, that's what he had been. Then made his way back to an appointed meeting place at Oyster Bay. Seeing a boat arrive, he assumed, he should never assume, that this was the American patriots, and they waved him down. So he went to meet the boat. Unfortunately, it proved to be a British frigate, and he was caught as he fled. Papers hidden in his person with notes from his week of spying proved his undoing. So he was arrested and brought before General Howe. Now, some say, no, that's not what happened. Okay. Others say, some accounts state he was recognized by his cousin, who was a loyalist working for the British, who turned him over to authorities. Another version reports British Major Robert Rogers recognized him despite his disguise in New York City tavern, and not divulging his revelation, Rogers struck up a conversation and gained his trust, telling him he was a patriot sympathizer. According to his account, Hale told Rogers he was gathering information for the British Army, and Roger invited Hale to dinner at the quarters with several friends. As he dined, he was taken into custody. So those are 3 different versions of exactly how Nathan Hale was captured and arrested. So he goes before the general. He was sent to the British headquarters for questioning. Maps and drawings of fortification were found on his person, which was, he really couldn't say, I'm not guilty of this. He's got everything with him. But the only thing he provided, as anybody in the Army knows, was his name, his rank, and then he also gave reasons he was behind the British lines. In quick succession, execution orders were issued. So there was no really trial. He just went before the general, and with the things that were found on his body, they said, okay, he was accused of treason. According to some accounts, Hale spent the night in a greenhouse at the mansion, while others said he spent it in a bedroom there. Again, they don't know exactly. There's many stories. He requested a Bible. His request was denied. Sometimes later, he required a clergyman. Again, the request was denied by the British. General Howe did permit him to write letters, one to his brother Enoch and others to his commanding officers. But the next day, they were torn up in front of him. And I want you to, the reason I put this in here is I want you to keep that in mind of how the British, okay, treated Nathan Hale, as opposed to how the colonists treated my great-grandfather. Keep that in mind. There's quite a big difference. Remember, he wasn't allowed a Bible, he wasn't allowed clergy, and they tore up everything he wrote. So we don't have any first-hand things that he did. His hanging. On the morning of his hanging, he was given an opportunity to make a dying speech. Unfortunately, I guess it was very moving, but nobody wrote it down, because of course at that time, they didn't. One report said he made a sensible and spirited speech. They quoted him as saying, "If I had 10,000 lives, I would lay them all down in defense of this injured, bleeding country," which isn't exactly what we studied in history books, but that's one version of what he said. And as you know, I used to do a thing in school, and I would start by saying something, and then the next kid would tell the next kid all the way around to, by the time he got through 30 people, that had nothing to do with what I said. And so you never know, what exactly he said. According to the standards of the time, spies were hanged as illegal combatants. One British officer wrote this in his document. He behaved with great composure and resolution, talking about Nathan Hale, saying he thought it the duty of a very good officer to obey any orders given to him by the commander-in-chief, and decided his spectators to be at all times prepared to meet death in whatever shape it might appear. So he was willing to realize that he was willing to give up his life. September 22nd, 1776. Again, there's no official writing down of this final speech. Nobody really knows. Just what various eyewitnesses said. This extraordinary effort memorializes a man known not for his life, but by his death, or more precisely for the words he spoke just before he died, or at least they think that's what he said. Okay? On September 22nd, 1776, as he was about to be hanged by the British Army camp in New York City, he reported declaring, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country," and that's what everybody remembers in history books, okay? Hale chose his words with care, yet he could not have imagined that he would be rewritten for more than 2 centuries in a nation that was barely 2 months old at the time of his execution. And of course, everybody in all the books, it has Nathan Hale and it has those famous words. But there's a question about, really was that what he said? Even though we know about it. Over the years, there's been a great deal of speculation. Did Nathan Hale really say those exact words, or a variation of it? If Hale did not originate the statement, it is possible that he instead repeated a passage from Joseph Addison's play Cato, which was widely populated at the time. And it said, "How beautiful is death when earneth by virtue. Who would not be that youth? What pity it is that we can die but once to serve our country." So he might have repeated something that he had learned from the book. Again, we don't know for sure. There's many sites that have been declared where he got hung, but of course, if you come to Manhattan, it's all buildings now. It's really hard to say where it could have been. There is a statue of him in City Hall Park, which was erected in 1890 inside the Grand Central Terminal. The Yale Club, which was where he went to college, bears a plaque hung by the Daughters of the American Revolution, which states the event occurred near the club. So they don't know exactly where that tree was that he was hung, but it's about there. As far as his legacy, there are statues of him all over the country. And here's some of the statues. They're not just in Connecticut, they're all over. And of course, he is revered in all the history books as a great American patriot. And even though he didn't really fight in the battles, He was a spy for a week and failed and got caught. Okay, so that's Nathan Hale. The other person that I want to talk about is Moses Dunbar, who happened to be my fifth great-grandfather. 6 months after Hale was executed, another Connecticut man died in a hanging noose. No one remembers him. Have any of you ever heard of Moses Dunbar? No, nobody has. I didn't either until about a year ago. However, because he supported the wrong side in the revolution, he's not mentioned in any of the books. Now think about it. If the British had won, we probably wouldn't hear about Nathan Hale, but we'd hear about my great-grandfather. Convicted by a civil court of treason, again, he was treason because he was going against his home state of Connecticut. Dunbar was executed in Hartford March 19, 1777. Yet his story is almost worth remembering for what it can tell you about the Revolution. I learned a lot on this. As an American history major, I learned a lot about the Patriots, but I never really mentioned they were loyalists. They were called Tories. That was about it. You know, they never really went into why they were or what they thought about it. So, he was born in 1746. He died in 1777. He was a loyalist. He was born in Connecticut. He was the son of a congregational minister, John, and his wife, Temperance. His father was a patriot. Remember how I said it's kind of like the Civil War? He was a loyalist. Some of his brothers were loyalists. Some of them were patriots. His father was a really starch patriot. And I'll tell you what he did, which I think will probably surprise you. He's described as being about 5'8" with blue eyes and sandy-colored hair. He got married at the age of 17, which back then was kind of normal. They went on to have 7 children before he was one, and broke with his family in church, and he joined the Church of England. Okay? And that's one of the things that is very important in understanding why he became a loyalist. He changed the church. He changed from the Congregational Church to the Church of England. He joined and that was unusual in a way, but many people did do this, okay? His religious affiliation perhaps strengthened his tie to the monarch, who served as supreme head of the English church. So therefore, because he joined the English church, the head of the church is the king. So therefore, if you're a good Christian person in that church, your loyalty is with the king, because he is monarch, but he's also the head of the church. With the start of the revolution, both he and his wife families divided politically, like I said. 2 of his brothers died fighting on the Patriot side. 2 other brothers were arrested for loyalist activity. So as you can see, it was brother against brother. Dunbar based his loyalty to the crown, like I said, for his religious beliefs, insisting that George III was head of the church, so he needed to have his allegiance to the king. Far more influential was Dunbar's belief that the difference between Great Britain and the colonies ought to be resolved without arms and shedding of blood. Basically, he was a neutralist. Okay, he wanted to stay neutral. He didn't believe in the war. He didn't believe in the fighting. He believed that this could be settled without having a major war. He tried to stay neutral, and this is the part I never realized and never really was taught when I was learning about the American Revolution. Many of his neighbors disagreed. Moses was just a simple little farmer. He wanted to live on his farm, grow his crops, and, I'm not going to bother you, you don't bother me. But as political animosities intensified, local committees supporting the American cause sought to silence their opponents, often with violence. A crowd of angry men set upon Moses Dunbar, beating him so severely that he feared for his life. Okay, he wanted to stay neutral. He said, I don't want to get involved, but they wouldn't hear that. So they came to his house, and they beat him up. I found out that there was a Tory den, which was hidden in the woods in Connecticut. And what would happen is when the different patriots would come, the Tories would go and hide in this den in the woods. And Moses was known to have been hidden there with the other loyalists. Tories also played a lively game of cat and mouse with the Sons of Liberty. When the Tories went hunting for Tories, when the sons went hunting for Tories, the women sounded the alarm by blowing a dinner bell, dinner horn. The signal would send all the Tories into the woods to hide in the den until they were gone. Then once they were gone, the women would give the signal again and they would come out of the den. As a side note, this den was not discovered until 1838. They'd heard about it, okay? People, folklore and stuff like that, but they didn't know where it was. But it was finally discovered. Some young boys accidentally found it, okay? Some believe there might have been a partially underground entrance, but none has ever been found. And if you go there to this day, there's trails, and you can follow where it led, and you can go see the den, and it's accessible from April until October. Local, like I said, local legend had it. The Tories hid their gold beneath the Tories' den. Visitors in this area reported hearing voices. Sometimes there's heavy breathing. It kind of sounds like what you hear about, like in Gettysburg and some of the other places in the battlefields. You hear, they hear sounds and stuff like that. They never found any money, but that's folklore. Sometimes heavy footsteps of Tory hunters are often heard, and some soldiers are often seen. So it was kind of like I said, some of the battlefields of the Civil War. Okay, 1775, 1776, once the war begins, okay, it becomes polarized. You're either on this side or you're on that side. Once again, Dunbar offered to retreat to his farm and stay neutral. But again, neutrality was no longer possible. In May, his wife died after months of illness. The baby, she had died within days of his wife. She possibly died of childbirth fever, we don't know for sure, but it could have been from the stress of never knowing if the house, so they said some of the house was on fire and they attacked everything. So the toll was heavy on his wife and his family. The following slides are based on actual writings. Now, remember, I said we don't have anything Nathan Hale. We have tons on Moses. In fact, you can go on the internet, you can find all the speeches, this last speech he wrote, all the things that he wrote, and all the things that he quoted, which is quite different from Nathan Hale. Finding my life uneasy, and as I have reason to apprehend in great danger, I thought in my safest method to flee to Long Island, which I accordingly do. So things were so bad there, he figured if he left, maybe his wife and his family would be okay. They wouldn't necessarily go after them, so he decided to go to Long Island. The following slides are based on actual writings of what he did in 1776. But having a desire to see my friends and children and being under engagement of marriage, he's engaged already, with her Esther Adams, who was to be his wife. The banns of marriage had been before published, so he returned and was married. So he went to Long Island, but then he came back because he was going to get married. Having in mind to remove my wife and family, he said, well, I think it'd be safer if I take my wife and family to Long Island. So I'm going to take him to Long Island because it's safer. So he went back to New York the second time to prepare for his wife to come. When there, I accepted a captain's warrant from the King's service in Colonel Fanny's regiment. So he became part of a regiment this time. So he went from being neutral to actually joining the British Army. While I was there, Connecticut Legislature passed a law declaring that an act to be a criminal crime. So being a loyalist and going with the British now became a crime. And so you could be hung for treason. 1777, he began recruiting men for the British Army in New York and Connecticut. He was arrested when Dunbar returned to Connecticut, this time to fetch his wife and children, to take them back. He was arrested. Local officials received a tip from his neighbor. His crime was being found with a captain's warrants in his pockets, authorizing him to enlist men and horses for the British. So once again, in his own words, I returned to Connecticut when I was taken and betrayed by Joseph Smith and was brought before the authority of Waterbury. They refused to have anything to do with the affair. I was carried to Farmington before Justice Strong and Justice Whitman, and by then committed to Hartford, where the Supreme Court was then sitting. I was tried on Thursday, the 23rd of January 1777 for high treason against the state of Connecticut. See, they wasn't an American. The United States wasn't formed yet. So he was convicted of treason against the state of Connecticut by an act passed in October. Being accused of enlisting men for Howe and having a captain's commission for that purpose. I was adjudging guilty on the Saturday following, was brought to the bar of the court and received sentence to death. The time of suffering was afterwards fixed to be the 19th day of March, 1777. So again, he was accused of treason, okay, against the state of Connecticut this time, and sentenced to be hung. The indictment said, this is what the indictment charged him with: not having the fear of God before his eyes and being seduced by the instigation of the devil, conducting a traitor's correspondence with the British Army, who joining a British regiment with engaging to levy war against Connecticut, and who attempted to enlist his brother-in-law. So, you know, they invoked God and devil and everything else and what he did. While under sentence to death, he knocked down and tried to escape, but it didn't work out for him. Before the hanging, there were 4 expresses. People went and tried to plead his case against the authority, but they would not hear him. Okay, they fell on deaf ears. After the trial, get this, Dunbar's estranged father allegedly offered to supply the rope to hang his son. Okay, I thought that was really going way beyond. He mentioned that he was a patriot, his father was, but he went all the way to say, here's a rope, hang my son. No, that's pretty heavy. Moses' 18-year-old wife, being pregnant, was forced to ride with him in the cart, the hanging. Shortly afterwards, she was forced to flee town and warned, do not return. On March 19th, a sermon was preached at the jail, so obviously he was allowed clergy. His homily shown here was printed by Nathan Strong. We have the whole religious ceremony at the jail, all in print in a booklet. And his final words, one eyewitness to his execution, noted he read aloud a passage in the book of Job, so obviously he was allowed a Bible, okay, and clergy. And he said, Dunbar demonstrated that neither side of the United States in the American Revolution held a monopoly on principle. Both of these young men believed in what they fought for. He was as fully convinced as Nathan Hale had been in the nobility of the cause for which he was about to die. As previously mentioned before, Moses Dunbar died. He wrote out his final words in a small 10-page booklet, which was printed. He read them to the large crowd, so he was allowed, and so we know exactly what he said. There's no question like there was with Nathan Hale. Nobody wrote it down, nobody published it, but they did with him. And the colonists allowed this. He read them to the large crowd assembled for his execution. He left an autobiography as well as a letter of advice for his children. And this is all found. This is all on the net. We can find all of these things. It showed him to be a man of strong principle, conviction, and spiritual beliefs. The entire words could be found, like I said, on the internet. In his own words, many of the next few slides are from the 10-page pamphlet. And it recounts all the problems that he had because of his beliefs and the action that he chose to be neutral. And I'm not going to read all this, but he tried to stay neutral. You know, he tried. He tried over and over again, but they wouldn't let him become neutral. He was harassed for his religious and political views, often attacked by the mobs, and was beaten. And this is what he wrote for his children, and if you look at it, I mean, obviously the man believed in God and told his children, you know, to believe in God, Lord's Prayer and all of that stuff. And he said, I'm now in Hartford jail, condemned to death for high treason. I was 30 years last June. God bless you. Remember your father and mother and be dutiful to your present mother. So the second part is said, by joining myself to the church occasioned a sorrowful breach between my father and me. Because he joined the church, that's when his father really started being very much against him. Like he didn't help him with his livelihood. Likewise, he caused him to treat me very harshly. He hardly didn't, which I hardly forgave him, as well as my brothers. and he invokes gods. I cannot take the last farewell of my countrymen without desiring them to show kindness to my poor widow and children. You know, please treat, just because I did this, don't take it out on them. And so we have a lot, which is amazing. We have very little on Nathan Hale, but we have a lot on my great-grandfather. Every word he said, the sermon they preached, and all of this. He ends with these thoughts. Now I have given you a narrative of all things material concerning my life. And it goes on, the last advice to you is that you, above all and other concerns, prepare yourself for your future. God the Father, God the Son. So he was a very religious man, obviously. He was the only man in Connecticut history to ever be hung for treason. He was executed before a large spectacle. I know when I told the kids about hangings, they had a lot of people, the whole town would come out. But you figure they didn't have baseball or football or baseball, you know, all these other things, spectacular, the different sports you could go to and concerts. This was what, you know, this was something they all wanted to see because there wasn't a lot of excitement here back then. So they all came out. His remains were taken to the ancient burying grounds, and he was placed in an unmarked grave. Like I said, it's believed the noose on the hanging tree was left afterwards for weeks to say, listen, this is what happens. Okay, this is what happens to people that go against the colonies in the state of Connecticut. One of his close relatives lived nearby and was not too far. They think maybe that his grave was moved there, but they're not sure. Update on burial, there's an article published by the New England Historical Society that says it's believed that his body was moved later to the Episcopal Cemetery in East Plymouth. And that even though, however, there's no headstone, no record of removal, but they believe this. Okay, they believe this. Update is there's another memorial that includes a headstone now that's been put there. In conclusion, many Americans preferred to focus on the Revolution's winners, celebrating the virtues exemplified by Hale, and ignored the bitter decisions of families like Moses. This reminds me, like I said, a lot about the Civil War, where families were, you know, brother against brother, father against son. And this was really quite an example of it. His father, you know, gave the noose for this. Hale was denied both the Bible, the clergy, and everything, and there's no record of it. Whereas Dunbar was allowed the church, the Bible, and the whole thing, and his speech is written down. So that's quite the difference there. Both were honorable men, and they believed in what they fought for. Their two lives kind of intertwined, so they were both in Connecticut. One was a school teacher, soldier disguised as a school teacher, and you know they both traveled to New York. They both did all of these different things. I'm just going to kind of fly through this because I want to get to the next part. The next part is what else I discovered. In the mid-20th century, okay, the 1900s, a couple fascinated by the colonial homes found the Graves homestead, dismantled it, and moved it. In the process of dismantling, they found that small booklet, 10-page booklet. And so it wasn't until, you know, it's 200 years later that they actually found the booklet, and now, of course, like I said, it was long lost, and that you can find it on the internet, wherever you want to find it. Then remember I mentioned genealogy, and when I was doing research, I came upon his descendants. I had no idea that I had a fifth great grandfather was a Tory, but I was down at the Troy Historical Society and doing research on my ancestors, and I discovered this man's, who was my fourth great grandfather, did the story of everything. I had no idea about this. And as I was telling Ryan earlier, when you do research in genealogy, it's really important to go to libraries, museums, historical societies, because you can find stuff that's not on the net. Not on the net. And 3 years after Moses was hung, okay, his stepmother remarried Chauncey Jerome, who was the brother of Moses' first wife. Well, the family here. Some sources say they moved to Nova Scotia, and many of the loyalists after the Revolution did leave and go to Canada because it was safer there. By 1780, the entire family was back in Connecticut again. You know, things had changed. And then by 1791, Zina was living in Pennsylvania. And this is where it starts there. And I found out another one of Moses' son, Dana, who had a son named Chauncey Dunbar. And he and his children all lived in Wyoming County. And I found out where they lived. They lived in Sheldon. And what's really interesting is because I taught in Wyoming County for 34 years, and I never knew I had any relatives there. And so I do. And I found a lot of information. I visited their graves. I went to join the Sheldon Historical Society. Moses' great-grandson is buried in Barrysburg. Dana's wife is buried in Persons or Pioneer Cemetery, and I went and visited that. I found a grave marker. That was taken a couple of years ago. It's really in bad shape now. But a lot of these historical societies have taken over graves and cemeteries and are really trying to bring them back and improve how they can see them. Her daughter Amanda is buried in Bennington. Sabra Case, another daughter, is buried in Frick's Corner Cemetery. Some of these cemeteries, oh my God, there's not much there. And most of them you can't even read the markers, but I went and looked at all of them. Dana married a second time. His daughter is buried in Barrysburg. So all of these descendants of Moses Dunbar, at least for two of his sons, came in this area. Another daughter is buried in Strikersville. And in researching, there are many articles written recently about Moses, which I was very surprised. In fact, this book is it's called The Martyr the Traitor, and it's the whole story of Nathan Hale and Moses Dunbar. The whole book's on him, which I thought was pretty neat. And then these are books about where he lived, the Tories, and tell us about the Tory den and all that, and about some of the ghosts and how they hear some of the soldiers and the sounds and things like that. Like I said, these are a couple other books, and you're welcome to look at them. I also put together a whole, this is all the information I found on Moses, and I've got maps and stuff, and I've got all the information about Wyoming County. I was telling, I went over to the county clerk, and I got all the records of where the land was that they lived, and I mean, it's amazing what you can find these days. But you have to go, like I said, it's not all, I didn't find that on the net. I found that by going to the county clerk. There's a couple other books on Connecticut loyalists, but I think one thing I learned about this was I never had you always had the patriot view of the American Revolution. You never hear about why they were loyalists and why they were Tories and how they really tried to stay neutral. You know, they didn't want to fight, but they wouldn't let them. But it's also interesting to find out that we have no documentation, really, on Nathan Hale. And he was taught by the British, but my great-grandfather, who was taught by the colonists, we have everything on his. We have everything he said, everything the sermon the minister gave to him. We have the whole 10-page book that he wrote, and we have everything, which is, you know, amazing that we have more on him that's verified than we do from Nathan Hale. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. I hope you gained a better understanding of what it was like to be a loyalist during the American Revolution, or I like to call it America's first Civil War. I brought with me the 3 books I mentioned in my research, plus my binder of all the research I did for genealogy, visited the cemeteries. I bought copies of land records. I visited the historical societies. You know, I did all sorts of things to get all the information. And it's amazing these days, all of a sudden, because like this book that she wrote, okay, is, let's see, it was just published in 2017. So nothing has ever been published about Moses until 2017. So it's kind of interesting that it seems like in this century, we've really dealt with a lot of the history, especially like women, and found out little known facts about things like Moses. So, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. You're welcome to, if you have any questions or look at my books or anything like that, you're welcome to. I really enjoyed doing the research for this. I love researching.
Have you looked up any of your relatives?
Pardon?
Have you looked up any of your relatives?
Oh,
In Wyoming?
no. I haven't gone into that yet, no, to see. Although I gave this down at Sheldon Historical Society, but nobody ever mentioned, because there are Dunbar still there. And they kind of add.
Sometimes they might be doing some research.
Yeah.
You know, I don't.
They might know something more too.
That's true.
Yeah. Richard?
My wife and I took a vacation up in Nova Scotia, and they had a lot there about the history and the loyalists and the revolution. It was really interesting. It was a little bit of an eye-opener.
Oh, yeah.
And that, I don't know if Rick Atkinson, he wrote that book, The British Are Coming.
Oh, yeah.
And when you read that, a lot about the British point of view in there. You know, really interesting, really different.
Yeah, because in our history books, when we taught it, I taught American history, you don't really teach that.
Right,
You know, it's all the patriots. And you just mentioned some of the loyalists. Okay.
right.
You don't go into the theory of why they were and what they had to put up with, you know. And then now some of them obviously got more militant. But maybe they got more militant because they had to. They had to. So it's an interesting thought anyway. Interesting thought.
I did something else I couldn't go.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Emily Joyce. Thank you again for another wonderful presentation. Thank you everybody for coming out. Just let you know, there's 2 events tomorrow. In the morning, we have Java with Joe at 9 o'clock. Tyler Angora from the Roy Historical Society, used to be our curator here, will be presenting on Ingham University, the first accredited women's university in the entire United States, right in Leroy. And then in the evening, we have another guest speaker, Vic Vignola. We'll be talking about the Battle of Seven Pines in 1862, so you can get your Civil War fix. We got our Revolutionary War fix, now our Civil War fix. We're covering everything. So hopefully we'll see you at those. And just sort of a general announcement, the museum will be going through changes beginning in July, most likely. County's going to start doing some renovation projects. So we will be in sort of chaos mode for a while. And there will be a time where we will be closed in the future. But I am working with other spots in Batavia to do all these events, so I don't think we're going to miss anything. So I will keep everybody informed. Just look out for notices on that because we don't have all the details set yet. But just so you're aware. So hopefully we'll see you, if not here, at another place. So have a good night.
And then if I